We are in season 4 of What, Why, God. And in this season, we are tackling the question, why go to church? And the American church is declining, and the West in general. And it's had some pretty devastating consequences, I think, on the world. There is an epidemic of anxiety and depression and loneliness, and people just don't really have community. And today we're talking with Missy Edgman. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Missy is that there was a study that came out in June that said that highly educated men are now more likely to go to church than highly educated women. And I thought, well, that's odd because, there's a lot of things, and we'll dig into that a little bit. But women have always been almost the leading factor in growing the church at the very beginning. They were the first ones to kind of jump on board. And so let's kind of start right there, Missy. She's our women's minister, by the way, if I didn't already mention that. And so she's going to speak on the role of women in the church and how much they have made an impact. So let's just start with that question. So tell us a little bit about early Christianity and how that had an impact on women.
Oh, it was huge. The Roman Empire at the time that Christianity began was an atrocious place for a lot of people to live. Unless you happened to be very wealthy and a male, it was really a pretty awful place to live. When we had our discussion, you shared with me about that letter that you had learned about recently. Mm-hmm. It was a man who was writing home to his wife, a Roman man. And he was excited about their upcoming baby, but he was telling her, if it's a girl, just throw it out. So it was common practice back then, as it is has been in China up until very recently. If you have a baby girl, that's not a desirable thing, so just throw her out. And really the positive impact that Christianity had on women everything started with Jesus, and it started with his example. He was he honored women.
He was kind.
You could look at how he treated the woman who was caught in the act of adultery. You could look at how he treated the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well. She had many marks against her as far as society was concerned, and Jesus treated her yeah. with honor. Mm-hmm. He had many women among his disciples. There were women who supported his ministry. He received all of that from them. They were absolutely welcome to be with him back in a day when women were not even really treated like they were fully functioning human beings in a lot of ways.
And even in the Old Testament, God speaks into a lot of that and says that a woman's life is just as important as a man's, and
absolutely
protects him quite a bit.
Jesus is the physical manifestation of God. So everything he did, all of his same priorities have always been God's priorities. It's sometimes hard for us to read that in the Old Testament. I do think we didn't talk about this, but I think that is one of the reasons that sometimes the church has a bad rep for women is people look at some of the scriptures from the Old Testament, but they're taking it and putting it into a modern context, into our modern cultural context. And it sounds so almost barbaric sometimes, the way some of the women would have been treated. But if you understand the culture that they were living in at the time, God was he was giving them many necessary protections at that time. So that's one of the things actually I love to do when I'm teaching the Old Testament, is to explain all of this cultural significance to the things that you're reading and help you understand it and see God's heart for women, because it's always been that way.
I think we miss, when we're reading that, how actually very hostile the culture was in general. It was just a very hostile culture. Whether you were Christian or not, the culture for women was just, it's hostile for everybody, but
you're talking about the Roman early,
the Romans and even beyond, even when you're talking about Old Testament, it was very much a very hostile, no grace kind of a situation, particularly for women,
and physically dangerous.
Yes,
physically very dangerous, and so you need protection when you're in a place where people can just attack you and there's no particular consequence for it.
Right.
Then you need protection, and God offered that to women. So the Israelites had ways of treating people that were far and above what the people who were surrounding them, how they treated people, and women were definitely part of that.
Yeah.
So yes, even before Jesus, but then obviously the way that Jesus treated women. And then, the very first witnesses of the resurrection were women.
Yeah.
And that was by design. Yeah. I have no doubt that God did that on purpose to allow women. He was establishing something here. He was helping people see something differently than they had been seeing people. And as a matter of fact, I forget which gospel it is, but when one of the women ran and told the men that, the tomb's empty, they thought she was just
They
crazy.
didn't believe her.
They just thought she's
Yeah.
just crazy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you could see that, totally picture it. And she was right.
Yeah.
And also, you know, the Holy Spirit poured out on women just as it did on men. And so the Spirit of God was affirming the role of women among the community of believers from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And so the church became a place that was very different with the way that women were honored. And then back to that comment about the man who told his wife to throw his little baby girl out, the Christians began to go and gather up those baby girls. And they formed orphanages and they raised those baby girls.
Yeah.
And so from the beginning, Christianity was just a
Saving
very,
people.
very good and safe,
Yeah.
affirming place for
Yeah.
women to be.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the way it taught men to treat women was completely different.
Yeah, love them how Christ loves the church.
Yes,
That he
as
gave his life for them.
And be
Yes.
faithful husbands.
Yes.
Like, forget all this stuff about divorce. Back in the Roman days, the husband could just tell her, I'm divorcing you. And that was all. That was it.
Yep.
She had no recourse. She had no support. She had nothing. And the Christians said, don't do that. You know, you have one wife, you honor your marriage, and husbands treat her, love her.
Yeah.
And not only that, but take part in the child rearing too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's a huge part of what it is. You know, when you're a woman and you're married, chances are you're going to have kids. And if you have a husband who's not interested, not supportive, I mean, that's one of the leading reasons that women say they get abortions is because the father isn't interested in being part of the child rearing at all.
Yeah.
And so Christianity taught, look, this is all part of the deal.
Yeah.
You know, you treat her with kindness. Women are worthy, even if they're not married or mothers. And, you know, even baby girls, they're worthy.
Yeah.
And you treat them the right way.
Absolutely.
So that was from the very, very earliest days of Christianity.
So as we talk about Christianity born from a hostile culture, I think we're witnessing that today too.
Yeah, it's kind of come full circle.
Yeah. So and women are an integral part of the family. We're conduits for a true miracle.
Yeah.
People wouldn't be here if it weren't for us,
Yeah.
and that actually gets to happen inside of us, which is really a miracle. So let's talk a little bit about that and how the church agrees and sometimes disagrees with how today's society deals with women and what our purpose is today.
So I said earlier, it came full circle. Earlier I said that because, you know, Christianity went on from those very beginnings to grow and grow and grow and influence the way people began to think about what was good.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we just sort of take it for granted that things like volunteering, being generous with your money, helping people out who are poor, volunteering, the idea of justice, just, you know, you may not necessarily
Feeding
agree
the
on
poor.
what a justice is, but you know that there's a thing, justice, and it matters if you're just or not, telling the truth, feeding the poor, all of these things. We've just embraced that as being true. Well, those were Christian ideas. Those weren't things you can look in areas of the world that are not Christian, and they may do some good things, but usually they're trying to pay their way to heaven in some way or other. Yeah. You know, there's just really some rotten behaviors. People will degrade down to really, really rotten behaviors without godly instruction.
Yeah.
And so Christianity just brought us along until now we just take it for granted that these things are true. So I would say where we agree is that the culture cares if women are treated justly. They care if women are given a decent shot at being able to provide for themselves or their families, or if they're paid a wage that's equal for the equal amount of work. They would say it's not a good thing to have a woman be sex trafficked. We would agree on that kind of thing. Yeah. They would agree, I would think, that a father of a child should be part of the caregiving. He shouldn't just dump it on the woman to have to handle all alone without any kind of support. I think we agree about all of those things. Areas of disagreement, though, and this is where we've come full circle to kind of the negative part of what it means to be a woman in our culture. It's come in the form of the idea of being a woman we've been sold this idea by our culture that being a woman is a really bad thing. particularly when it comes to our reproductive capacity. So I came up with examples
ball and
from
chain, as it were, in some
yes.
regards.
So if you get pregnant and have a child, then that's generally seen as something that's a horrible burden. It limits all your freedom. That's the worst thing you could have done in your life, is to limit your freedom. So whatever we have to do to make sure that you can maintain your autonomy, that's the highest good. But what it does is it denigrates something that's essential to being female.
Yeah.
And it makes it seem like, well, you have to erase that part of yourself and you have to be a male in every way. You have to be like a male. You have to be able to have sex without ever getting pregnant.
Yeah.
Or having the baby.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're going to do what we have to do to make sure that you never have to actually have that function unless you want it, or unless you have all the support in place or whatever. But, so it's just given this message that being fully functioning female is not a good thing. And I was sharing with you how I've seen it in advertisements. And this is one of those things that once you start to see it, you can't unsee it. Some of the examples I gave were like a very current, as of this recording, a very current ad for Amazon. So school's just starting up again, and it's a mom that's talking about how much money she spends on her kids, how much I've spent so much on them in the past, and this year I'm just not going to spend as much money. And so she's buying all her stuff on Amazon, which is, she's saving money doing it. But her attitude just really stinks. She's like, I'm going to buy them things for their sport, whatever sport this is. She's holding up a lacrosse stick. She can't bother to know the sport. Or I'm going to buy them their food that they're not even going to touch for their lunches. And then she's walking away looking at the camera and saying, so for all the things that you need for your little parasites, go on Amazon. So she refers to her children as parasites. And it's funny, not funny, because it really is telling about our attitude about children. And other examples I gave to you were like a cell phone company that was selling the family plan without the family. And so it contrasted this chaotic scene where you had a husband and wife, and his hair was all messed up, and he looked like he was, just in shock, and the children were running all around behind him, all chaotic and throwing things around, being loud. Have the family plan without the family. So then you slide over here to this peaceful living room where it's a single woman. So these ads are aimed at women, and she's just scrolling through her phone, just relaxed as anything, because you don't want the kids. That's the message you get loud and clear.
Yeah.
You don't want all that.
Yeah.
You get it through the car commercials. The lady who's rolling up her window to block out the sound of her kids doesn't want to go in the house. She's going to stay in the driveway with her comfortable leather seats instead of going in where the kids are, because you don't want the kids. That's the message we get over and over and over again.
And
we get it
sad.
and in the news. I was telling you about how I was listening to NPR a little bit after COVID. So the not long after COVID, the big story about jobs was, oh my gosh, there's this giant gender gap right now because all these women had to start staying home because of COVID, and now they're forced to stay home and take care of their children. They can't return back to work. They're being forced, as if they maybe didn't possibly think that I actually like spending some time with my kids. I had to stay home with them. Yeah, a lot of us did. We had to stay home. That wouldn't have been our choice. But then you get to spending time with your family, and it's like, this is much more fulfilling than maybe I realized. And maybe this is actually worth a pay cut. Like one lady, fast forward 4 years now that women have had longer chance. Now there are more women actually in the workforce than there were before COVID. But this one lady was like, I took a 40% pay cut because I liked being around my kids.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't know that by listening to NPR. You'd think that it was just this huge tragedy because women are losing all of the advances, air quotes, that they've made in the workforce, because that's where the real advances are, right? It couldn't be that there's value in being home with kids and,
it used to be that listen, if you want to work. If you want to stay home, stay home.
Yeah.
No big deal. It's. I think the fight was to be able to have that opportunity.
Exactly, and I don't think
and
anybody
now
would
it's
want to take that
become
away.
like that's the only good thing, and having children is bad. And
right.
And I think I told you about a story that I heard about a woman who did really well, lives in a very affluent city, got herself this house. Said, I'm going to YouTube fix it all up. And she's all by herself doing all of this. And she goes, and at the end of the day, after a few years, I'm sitting in my beautiful house all by myself, knowing that I've made all this money and then I've got nothing. Okay, I'm all by myself still. And so there's something to that about community. And I do think that there's been this weird animosity built up between women that want to be home and want to be with your children and women that go to work. There shouldn't be.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be.
Or even just the function of having children at all. I mean, I just think the whole thing. And so, the question being, where are we in disagreement? That's a major area of disagreement because the church has always valued family.
Right.
And our culture right now does not value family. And it's such a huge gap.
Yeah.
And there's lots of baggage in our culture on what family means. It has these oppressive overtones to it. You have to stay home and take care of the children. You lose your financial freedom. There's all this sense of loss and limit, and that's not how the church views it at all.
Yeah.
And so we're very, very different.
So let's pivot then to something a little bit more where we can celebrate women. So the church really is a place where you're going to celebrate women and their role in the church. I mean, very few churches actually have very few women in them. I mean, most of the kind of down and dirty stuff, like, taking care of children and some of those sorts of things in church. That's just a small part, but it's
an important part.
But it's very important.
We don't care about the next generation.
A lot of women are totally fine with doing the behind the scenes stuff and just, and I mean, we have women on stage that worship, and let's talk a little bit about that. And I mean, we recognize there's church hurt. Has certainly been, churches are full of people that are not, perfect.
Yeah. I mean, there's the ideal that we're called to in Christ. He says, be perfect as my heavenly Father is perfect. And his teaching constantly was, what I'm telling you is actually impossible to do. You cannot be perfect. I'm telling you to be perfect, but it's my perfection that I'm giving to you. That is the message of Christ. It is a wonderful, freeing message. And when you understand it, it's good for women, it's good for men, it's good for children. It's just good. And it's not a message that you don't have to constantly be thinking, being mad all the time. This is the alternative that I see the world is giving to people right now. It's just this constantly churned up kind of angry feeling, like you have to be mad and stirred up about something. In the church, you can lay it down.
Yeah.
And you can it's not perfect because it's people, but it's people who know the grace of God.
Yeah.
And they're going to give that grace to each other, and they're going to grow in that grace. And that there's a lot of joy in watching people grow. There's a lot of joy in serving and finding out what you're good at. There's a lot of joy in being able to be part of a community that's not in competition with one another. You're all there with one aim, that's to worship God and to make him great. And that's just a good place to be. And I would say that for women too, we don't check our brains at the door. We're
exactly. I was just going to say that. I mean, Missy has so many great women's groups and wonderful things that you put together, so women can still be women with each other. It's not like you have to be with men all the time and doing what men want to do, because I do think society's kind of try to make us into men. And it's okay to be a woman, and we celebrate that.
Yeah. We actually have a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun. We can joke a lot in ways that we wouldn't if it were a mixed crowd. And we have a lot of fun together. But yeah, we do challenging things. It's not all, sometimes I think people have the perception, oh, women are just there to, make casseroles or whatever. And cooking is important. That's good. I like getting fed. That's an important thing.
Yeah.
But, we do other kinds of classes and we challenge each other. We really dig in and we learn some things. We have some deep conversations.
Yeah,
and it impacts your family, because one of the things that I'm passionate about is equipping people to be able to have good conversations with the next generation, and to instigate those conversations in their homes, as opposed to waiting for your kids, because they may never ask you the questions. Your grandchildren may never ask you the questions. So equip yourselves now. So that's one of the things I like to do in women's ministry, as well as the more social things than just the fun things. And
it's a community. It's a real community of women that love each other. And it's interesting because every time I go to one of the women's events, because being online, I need to get out. And she reminds me often, you need to get in with people. And she's totally right. But every time I go, it's a different group. And it's a lot of women that I know, but I inevitably will meet people I hadn't met before.
Yeah. So, and it's really, my job is really fun because I get to watch all that. I get to watch, it's like, I can't believe you guys haven't met yet. So I get to see all these friendships form. And,
because people think, well, you work at the church. And like, it's a big church. Doesn't matter whether I work here or not. You're not always going to meet the same people. So it's a lot of fun. So I'm just going to end with a question. Can you give me a story of somebody, maybe a woman that you've met recently, or not? It doesn't even have to be recent, that has really realized the importance of church in her life. Maybe she hadn't gone for a while, or
Oh my goodness. Well, there's a lady that's kind of new here, and so she's been single for a number of years. She raised her boys, I think, probably mostly by herself. She's been divorced for a while, and then her adult son moved this way, and so has her only grandchild. So she moved this way, and really moved to be with the grandchild, and then they moved. They moved. Like she was kind of putting all of her everything into the grandkids.
Yeah.
And when they moved, she realized, oh, this isn't enough. I need something more. And so she did. She started to come back to classes, and she started to come back to church. She started to come to class. She's been signing up for just everything. When she's in town, she's there, and she's developing those relationships and taking part in all the fun things. And it's a family for her.
Yeah.
And so that's good to see. It's good to see that net there for her.
I love that. And I think that should speak to a lot of people out there who are feeling like, well, I'm by myself. I don't really have a spouse, or I can't go with anyone. There's always somebody here to greet you and meet you and get you involved. And we have so many different groups. And I would encourage anybody who knows someone who's not going to church to invite them to come. And I know Misty's very good at that. She will send you everything and anything you're interested in.
Yeah. Interviewing you and find out.
So thanks so much, Missy.
Yeah.
It's really good stuff. And I encourage you to invite your friends to church, particularly the women if they're feeling lonely and don't have a community. We really have, especially after 2020, become so isolated. And so I encourage you to come to church, to get to know who our great God and King Jesus is, that he loves you so much and he wants a relationship with you. And he has a family in a church ready to greet you, meet you, and share time with you. So thanks so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.